my discomfort in the present discussion is the inability of all the presenters to make us believe that amending the restrictive provisions of the Constitution is the way forward. I have not heard any of the presenters, Mr. Speaker, that they have at least asked the potential investors, whoever they are, the current and potential investors, did they talk to them? Did they ask them what they really wanted? Because probably we're not getting enough foreign direct investments because of the traffic, because of the high cost of electricity, because probably they think that peace and order is very unstable in this country, and probably the high cost of doing business in this country. These are all the things that they should have considered. I have not heard any of them, Mr. Chair, that they have probably made a survey. And in the survey, it's 99.9% the potential investors really wanted, okay, to amend the Constitution, specifically, which part? The part which they wanted to buy our lands? Eh sana ganun sa... Mr. Chair, sa ngayon, it's very much under speculation. Why is it that the most important people or respondents that should have been asked are absent? Eh sila yung iniimbita natin eh. Is it not correct for us to be able to ask them first? Ano ba talagang gusto nyo para kayo makapag-invest ng marami dito sa bansang Pilipinas? Para matalo namin ang Vietnam. Ano ba talagang gusto nyo? O sabi nila, ayaw namin sa inyo kasi matraffic kayo eh. O hindi na natin i-amend ng Constitution. Mr. Chair, ang nakalulungkot, sinasabi nating lahat, the economic presenters, sinabi nila, tayo ay masyado tayong malayo sa Vietnam. Tingnan mo ang yung performance natin on foreign investors. We are lagging behind. Ganito. Lahat. And I believe so, na siguro talagang tayo ang pinaka-kulelat, Mr. Chair. But we have not asked them, is it really the economic provisions, the factors or the main reasons why there is a sluggish entry or inflow of foreign investment in this country? Yun po yung nakita ko. Wala pong nag-present ng ganun. There should have been a comparative presentation na pinagtatanong po natin ang potential investors natin, mga capitalist, mga foreign capitalist, kung ang gusto talaga nila ay baguhin natin ang ating Constitution in relation to its economic provisions.
Thank you.
Wala po akong narinig, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
May I answer that, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Deputy Speaker Marcoleta. In fact, we have a consolidated matrix of position of resource person on specific amendments of the 1987 Constitution with regard to the economic restricted provision. And the business groups that were invited before and submitted their position papers in the 16th, 17th, and 18th Congress, because as you know, Deputy Speaker Marcoleta, this is just a continuation of hearing. Before we already had a committee hearing in this regard. And just to cite some of the business groups that submitted their positions papers, AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce, Mr. John Forbes, they agree with the changing of the economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution, even though the Philippines has experienced an increase in foreign investment in recent years, it still pales comparison with more affluent neighbors in this regard. However, it takes the position that there's no need to allow foreign ownership of lands extending the years of leasing lands may already suffice for purposes of investment. Joint Foreign Chambers of the Philippines said they are amenable to removing restriction without condition for investment climate policy reform. This is to permit more capital to flow into the Philippines to increase the rate of GDP growth. Employment also agrees with 100% ownership of lands. Makati Business Club agrees with the lifting of restriction and or putting lower barriers to trade and investment. It states that in competitive global economy, any barrier should be subject to modification and specific restrictions should be left to the legislature. Management Association of the Philippines agrees with the removal of the equity restriction. Mr. Peter Wallace, the President, Business Forum, recommends the removal of the economic restriction allowing foreign ownership. So we can cite so many positions of the resource person that was invited before, coming from the business groups, players in our economic sectors, and those who participate in our national patrimony. And they are submitted all their positions paper before this committee. At any rate, Deputy Speaker, we will invite them again.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I read that part already. Most of them are domestic groups. Well, siguro ang kaiba lang, American Chamber. Pero ilan sila? Ilang Amerikano ang nag-invest dito? Ang sinasabi natin, let us talk to the potential investors worldwide. Hindi lamang kukunting Amerikano na nagsabi na ganito yung gusto nating gawin. We are
Yes,
not...
the joint foreign chambers of the Philippines is composed of James Wilkins of the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Daniel Alexander, the President of Australia, New Zealand Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Julian Payne, the President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Nabel Francis, European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Kichi Matsunaga, Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Philippines, and Ho Ik Lee, Korean Chamber of Commerce, and Evelyn Nang, the Philippine Association of Multinational Companies, President, Regional Headquarters. So these are multinationals in the joint, wag ho kayo mag-alala.
Yeah, but these are not the representative potential investors. Yun ang ating sinasabi rito. Mr. Chair, we are proposing to amend our fundamental law. It should have been backed up by a well-researched study presented by a group involving potential investors worldwide. Not only a few Americans or a few Australians and a handful of Japanese or Koreans. And Chinese. Thank you very much. Kailangan nandun yung kitang-kita mo talaga. Each one of them are itching and proposing to us, please amend your constitution, specifically provisions 1, 2, 3, or... Kasi tayong lahat, sinasabi natin, kailangan po nating i-amend. Baligtad po parang nga nangyayari, we are putting the Carabao ahead of the cart.
Well, I think, Deputy Speaker Marcoleta, in all of the research person that we have asked to present their own position papers and back up with the data and analysis of their study. In fact, one that was presented by Cong was the study by OECD and the World Bank, where it shows that those restrictive countries, restrictive economy tends to receive less foreign direct investment or inflows of foreign capital. So yun siguro po yung hinahanap mo. And we have an OECD study that shows the flows of foreign direct investment. I fully understand your point that we need to invite the players, the players in the economic sector, as well as those who want to participate in our national patrimony, and come up with their position on what provision in the constitutions should be lifted so that they be encouraged to participate.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
kanina yung ating from the DILG, he presented his report and he touched base with so many sectors of our population. And he came up with this list. So I believe in this list, and probably these are all active signatures composing of something like 556,000 people wanting to amend our constitution. Pero sabi ko nga, he could have gathered 55 million votes. Kung pinresent niya sa mga tao, tingnan mo, lahat ng potential investors in this planet, talagang papunta sila sa atin kung i-amend ang constitution natin. Palagay ko ako, pipirma na rin kagad ako. Sapagkat nakita ko mismo, ang nagsalita are potential investors. These are the correct respondents that should have influenced our decision. Talaga palang kailangan nating i-amend ang constitution. Hindi tayong nauuna. Oh, teka muna, kulelat tayo. kaya pala tayo kulila at nagatatakot sila dahil malala ang traffic natin. Masyadong, para siya makakuha ng permit, Mr. Chair, it will take him 30 days.
Yeah, I
Samantalang
fully
sa
understand
Singapore,
your point.
one day lamang yung
Yes,
ano.
yes,
Pagkatapos
Deputy
ang
Speaker.
kuryente mo, napakataas. Baka ako, these are the factors that discourage the potential investors from coming in. Ako kung talagang ma-identify natin ngayon din, talagang lumitaw 99.9, ito talagang gusto ng mga investors. Sino naman tayo para hindi tayo, di ba, masway dun sa kanong argument?
I fully understand your point, Deputy Speaker. In fact, those are essentially domestic problems that can be addressed by, of course, good governance and political will. But you're speaking of restrictive economic provisions of the Constitution that can only be resolved through constitutional amendments. Those areas, you need not resort to constitutional amendment by solving the traffic and the high cost of electricity. But these sectors and areas of concern, restrictive economic provision really calls for a meaningful constitutional reform by lifting the said provisions.
Mr.
So
Chair,
you may proceed.
I'm only trying to explain that
Yes.
gusto nating palabasin the chief factors talaga, kaya natin inamend ang Constitution, ini-encourage tayo talaga ng potential investors. Kasi ang talagang ina-amend lang natin are economic provisions. Kaya ko lang naman nasasabi ang traffic, baka naman doon sila natatakot. Baka naman natatakot sila sa kuryente. Gusto ko lang linawin kasi baka mamaya misinterpret ninyo ako na i-amend natin ang Constitution because gusto nating masolve ang traffic. Hindi ganon.
Salamat, Tatay.